Hey everybody, what is going on? Welcome to the GMI Rocket Show. Today is episode number 53. I am your host, Roman Zelichenko. I am a former immigration attorney turned entrepreneur, and so I'm the founder of Laborless, which is an immigration tech startup that automates H-1B visa compliance, and also the founder of GMI Rocket, which is a digital marketing agency for immigration lawyers, global mobility, companies, and of course, which brings you this show, among other things. Today, we have a very special guest who I've had the privilege to talk to on a number of other occasions, but it's one of those things where you talk to people in different kind of industry contexts, and you think you get to know them, but you never really sit down with them and say, hey, can I get an hour of your time to learn more about your life and learn more about your journey? So I love that I have this opportunity. Our guest today is attorney Dionnie Wynter Pfunde, who is an immigration attorney, also an immigrant herself, and we'll get to her story. She's an immigration attorney who has had this incredible virtual, basically, practice for a number of years, well before COVID really forced a lot of people to go virtual and work from home. She's worked from all over the world, and she's based down in Florida, but she's worked out of beaches and hotels and you name it before it was cool. And so what I really am interested to talk to her about, in addition to her story and her journey, is how she's built that up, how she was able to do it before, it was kind of normal, in air quotes. And then, of course, since COVID has happened and a lot of people have been working remotely, Dionnie has launched something called the Wynter Immigration Law Academy, which, among other things, helps other immigration lawyers kind of do the same thing, streamline their practice, really get to know their brands, and build a virtual practice like she has. So super excited for this conversation. And of course, without further ado, Dionnie, thank you so much for being here and for taking the time. I'm very excited for this conversation.
Thank you, Roman. And let me say congratulations, number 53. 3 is my lucky number. So I think it's perfect that I'm here today. Congrats on being number 53.
Thank you. I love it. It's still, again, crazy to me every time, this show was an idea, like a small idea. I was just, let me start it and see what happens. And maybe I had a few guests lined up at the very beginning, and I'm just so honored and grateful to have people continue to come on my show. And they're also, the idea is that there's so many people who are building really cool businesses, whether they're technology based or just otherwise innovative in our industry. Nice. You talk to other lawyers and they think immigration law is such a tiny niche, but when you're in it, you realize that it's huge and there's all these different facets inside of it. So in any case, absolutely, I appreciate you being here. One of the things I want to say before we jump in, for folks who are watching live, please shout yourself out. Let us know in the comments who you are, where you're dialing in, or I don't know why I always say dialing in. This is live. We're on the internet.
No longer AOL.
Yeah, no one's dialing into anything. But like where you're watching from, and then obviously ask questions. I mean, and along the way, if you like the conversation, please give us a thumbs up or a heart or whatever you want to do to support this conversation. So hope to hear from you. And then, of course, ask questions all throughout. So Dionnie, you have a great social media presence, a lot of followers across many different platforms. And a lot of people know your story. I think one of the things that's really, admirable and inspiring about you is that you kind of lead with your own personal story, rather than with just this sort of professional lawyer facade. But if you would entertain me, and maybe reshare it, and hopefully we get some more maybe nuanced or other pieces of tidbits of information that you don't typically share. But, I always love to start with sort of the guest's kind of life story and a little bit about how they were when they were younger, where they came from and their whole journey. So you were born in Jamaica, on the island of Jamaica.
I was. And it's funny when people ask me about my story, I always say, do you have time? Do you have time to really talk about my whole life story? Because my life story goes all the way back. But yes, Roman, I was born in Jamaica.
And so I know that you grew up there and you spent a lot of your younger years there, right? And as far as I remember, your mom came over here early into the US. You were still in Jamaica. So can you share a little bit about that? Do you have memories, of course, of growing up there? Your mom was here. Like, was she coming back ever? Was she maybe sending money back? There are a lot of stories like this with people.
And it's funny because my story because of my story, that's where the passion for the practice of immigration law comes in for me. So when my mother departed the island, I was 13 years old. So I fully understood that my mother was leaving. So it wasn't as if for some children, they're 3 or 4, or maybe they're adults with a life of their own. I was 13, and you know what it is for a 13-year-old young girl. Your body is changing. You're starting to like boys. The insecurities are coming in. And I didn't know that I was losing my mother, which I'm glad. Rest in peace, Mom. I'm so glad she didn't land it on us. It was typically common in the Caribbean or most third world countries when one parent goes to the embassy to get a visitor's visa, they will not give it to the couple. That's what most people don't know, right? They'll give it to one, either the husband or the wife, just so that family member who departs will come back. So that was common in Jamaica at the time. So my mother was the fortunate one who, and I think my dad made the decision because my mother, she had some smarts about her. So he thought she would be able to kind of go off into the world and be able to navigate that a little bit better. So when my mother left Jamaica, I was 13. And she said, look, she's going to go for 3 months. It's going to be a vacation. She's not going to be gone for long. And then when she departed, she called back and she said, well, she's just going to stay for 6 months. She said they gave her 6 months. And so my sister and I, we had a calendar. And we kept saying, Mommy's coming back. And mind you, we're left with our dad. So our dad's taking care of all of us. And we kept marking the calendar. And she left April, and we knew she should be back before Christmas. So we just knew we were going to have a beautiful Christmas. So out of that, I am so happy, Roman, that she didn't tell us she wasn't coming back, because she left us with a little bit of hope. Mm-hmm. She left us with a little bit of hope.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So, and you think that your dad knew? I mean, that was probably the plan from the start. He just...
I think they knew, because so I didn't realize it, Roman, that we were extremely poor, because we owned a house. Mind you, it was a tiny little house, and my dad had some goats and he had a bicycle. So in our minds as kids, I didn't realize that my mother was a washerwoman. Like, she would go around to people's houses and wash clothes and clean their houses and things of that sort. So we were really poor. But as children, I don't think we knew that. We just thought, all right, we lived in the smallest house in the neighborhood, so what? Mm-hmm. So I think my parents really had that conversation about the kids are getting old enough for high school. And in Jamaica, you have to pay for high school. I think the conversation later told to me was, Dion is kind of talented, so we want to at least be able to give her a shot, whether it's to go off to university in Jamaica or at least get a decent high school education. Mm-hmm. So I think that conversation was had.
Wow. I love that. First of all, it's kudos to your parents and your family for not making you feel a certain way, right? Like, now you look back on that and you think, okay, we didn't have a lot, but like at the time I suppose you were happy enough and you had the things that you needed and you enjoyed mm-hmm. It's one of those things that, for when you see a lot of small kids, they have a ton of toys, but what mm-hmm. do they end up playing with? Like an old cardboard box.
A pot.
Yeah.
Or
exactly.
A pot. Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
You don't need much. That's so. Okay, so she went away. She went off. You were 13 years old. What did your dad do? So you said your mom was a washerwoman. Did he work somewhere? Did he have like a business?
He was a farmer. No, I had a business. Oh gosh, what do you think we are, Roman?
Well, farmer is a business too.
Yeah, well, he had, and being a farmer in Jamaica meant you bought a couple goats, you might have a cow, but he worked on a farm somebody owned a farm and he worked on the farm. And then his side business was raising his own animals. So I think the fact that I'm an entrepreneur by birth is just watching my parents, because my dad worked on a farm, took care of horses and cows and all that stuff. And then he would buy his own goats. To this day, he still buys and sells chickens. He's 80 years old and he still buys and sells chickens. I blows my mind. But in any event, so he was a farmer by profession, I should say.
That's super cool. That's what I mean. I mean, the business aspect of it is you're buying and selling or trading things. It could be the mm-hmm. smallest things. Mm-hmm. It's like you hear about sometimes, if I have guests on the show or other stories of kids selling baseball, trading baseball cards, like that's entrepreneurial in and of itself. You know that there's a market, you have a supply of some kind of a good or service, you sell it to people at a certain price. Not everyone thinks that way. Not everyone has that experience, especially as a younger person. So That's super cool. Do you feel like, now that you think about it, do you think that actually influenced you, or was it sort of subconscious that you watched, your parents work hard and have this side business of taking care of animals and maybe selling them or the goats or the milk or whatever it might be? Do you think that actually has impacted you in terms of not just running your own practice, but building other things on the side?
I think huge impact, because I think growing up the way we did, my parents grew up with insecurities. And, we would hear them at night talking about this needs to be paid, or you could overhear the arguments. The house was small enough. So they grew up with these insecurities that from a very early age, I think it was in my mind or my sister's minds, is we didn't want to have that kind of insecurity as adults. We didn't know what that meant, Roman. It's not like I said, oh, I'm going to grow up and become a lawyer in the United States and run an international law firm. That's not what that meant to me. In my mind, it meant Daddy has 3 goats. I think when I grow up, I want to have 6 goats. Right? That's kind of what it meant. In fact, my dad was here with me. He just left for Jamaica today because he goes back and forth. He has a green card. He's not a citizen, so he has to go back and forth. And I was talking to someone in Spanish, and my dad said, "Dee, you talk Spanish?" I said, "Dad, you sent me to a high school where they taught us Spanish." I said, "I didn't pay attention because I didn't know I was going to go off and see the world." So I learned just enough to keep me conversational in Jamaica. And he shook his head like, wow, she talks Spanish. So, in his mind, he thinks I can have a full conversation in Spanish. So no, I don't know, Roman, that it was going to be this big dream, but definitely it impacted me like tremendously, I would say.
Yeah. That must be a cool thing for him to hear now, and it's like, wow, all those years ago, the things that we did laid the foundation for this. So you were 13, she left, you stayed behind. Did you end up going to to a high school that they paid for? Yes,
I went to Ferncourt High School proudly. So, hey, if anybody from Ferncourt watching, I went on to Ferncourt High School, did really well. And my mom stayed in the States and was able, the tuition was paid, the books were bought, we had new shoes, because we were barrel children, we got our barrels 2-3 times a year with new stuff. So, we were one of those kids that were left behind on the island, raised by grandparents, aunties, good support system, by the way. And so we went on to high school, and I did really well in high school, and proudly so. I did super well in high school. I'm getting emotional because when you tell the story, like it takes you back, like.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious, what was your mom doing here? Do you know, or do you remember?
Oh, I know, because when we came, I would go. So my mom was in Manhattan. I don't know if they still have it, Roman. You live in the city. She was a nanny. They call them nannies, but she took care of other like families. So for example, if you have a baby and you'd have like a live-in helper, I'm sure you've seen all these women taking care, the Black Caribbean women walking the white babies in Manhattan. So my mom would stay with families for years. Like she would stay with the baby until the baby turned like school age, and then she'd go to another family. So my mother got to see the world, and she'll brag and tell you that she was taken to the White House by one of the families that she worked with. So my mom got to see the world and got to see some really nice places by virtue of, so she was a nanny and she was a dog walker. She would walk dogs in Central Park.
That's then I mean, having especially somebody who's going to live with you is such a power. It's I'm assuming for parents who are working all day 24/7 and they really need the help. It's really great. I also know, even if it's a part-time nanny, it's a really trusted, people are hard to find. And and not only do families really try to hold on to, and I mean, they really become a family member for you. It's not like you come in and you're help, like you are part of the family. That's really super. It's funny that she was in, she kind of came in and just into this big life, because I'm assuming the people who she worked with had at least some financial resources. So
It was a life that we weren't accustomed to.
Right, exactly. Wow.
And I'll tell you the story later about meeting my mother's lawyer. So we'll keep going, but I'll tell you how I knew what kind of lawyer I wanted to be.
Interesting. Okay. So let's skip ahead a little bit. You went to high school, you did really well. And then did you go to university in Jamaica, or did you actually leave?
I left before. So you kind of know how it goes. So my parents got divorced. Of course, I don't like talking about that part of it. But my mother remarried, and then she petitioned for me. So I came over. And by that time, I was a mother myself. Because teenage pregnancy is a huge, huge problem on the island of Jamaica. And I think in the Caribbean, and of course, I fell prey. I don't consider myself a victim by any means, because I have a wonderful, beautiful, amazing daughter. So eventually my mother petitioned for myself and my daughter, and we came over. And so I went to university in the States.
And how old were you when you came?
I was... I want to say maybe 23 days before my 21st birthday.
Okay.
And that's important, because I didn't realize that I didn't have all the rights I had in Jamaica. I just thought you could drink and drive. And my mom was like, no, you can't do this. You can't do that. You don't have a driver's license. So I always like to remember that I arrived shortly before my 21st birthday.
And I also want to clarify, your mom who came here, so you mentioned she got remarried. She got remarried to a U.S. citizen.
She did, yes.
Right. So then the immigration journey starts even there, right? Because she married to you, she adjusted and became a permanent resident and then a citizen. And then by virtue of that was able to petition for her, her daughter, and also her granddaughter. I'm assuming both. Is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And even more so because I was under 21, I was the first one to come over. Because I was the stepchild of the marriage. So I'm learning all of this later, like, how comes I was the first one? Mm-hmm. And my sister had almost aged out, so she had to wait a little bit longer. So it's crazy. I think my whole family is this patchwork of like how the immigration laws work.
Which of course goes to show it's important to have an attorney, because the patchwork is, if you have a really streamlined case, okay, it might be simple, but very often it's not that simple. Right. So you came here, you were 20, just under 21 years old. You had a 4-year-old, right? 4-year-old daughter. Mm-hmm. And did she, I'm just curious, did she kind of know what was going on? Or, I mean, I know she was pretty young, but yeah.
She had no clue. All she knew was that she was leaving her friends behind. She was devastated. She hadn't fully learned English yet. So she was still talking Patois, because she's at the age where she wasn't fully in school. So even for me sending her to school in the Bronx, it was challenging for her, because she's just learning English, just learning to communicate. So for her, it was traumatizing. Mm-hmm. So she didn't know what was going on. She just knew mommy was going on an airplane and she was going with mommy. That was the extent of it.
Yeah. Does she have any memories of like the trip or, the move?
She talks about the snow, because we landed in a snowstorm, and I remembered she said to my mother, and my mother told me this, and she remembers this. She said, in Jamaica, in English, it means grandma, it's really cold. Mm-hmm. And she remembers saying that to her grandmother at that age. And every now and again, she'll remember, like, she'll say some things about like walking somewhere and it's weird, like this weird place. But for the most part, most of her memories are gone.
Yeah. I mean, I moved here when my family moved here, I was 2.5. So I don't remember anything. Mm-hmm. And that's why I was curious. I was wondering if it was like at 4 years old, maybe you have maybe 1 or 2 memories, but yeah, most of it is growing up here.
It's gone.
Yeah.
All her memories is very much, but she does say she feels like a connection to Jamaica at times. She'll feel this kind of connection. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, she has one, right? It is there. So you came here and you went to, did you start university basically right away, or you kind of got yourself situated and then
my mother had one role. So this goes back to my mother was a nanny in the city, made really good money. So I don't ever want, when I talk about like my mom being a nanny, it wasn't like, she was doing extremely well, because these are well-paying jobs, mm-hmm. right? It's not like these families are taking advantage. My mom, for the entire time she lived in the state, I think she worked with 3 families who treated her extremely extremely well. So she didn't have, some people have bad experiences, my mother didn't. And so when my mother came, she took me like to the family she was with, and she said, I don't want my daughter to become a nanny. And I'm like, I want to be a nanny because first of all, it's cash, no taxes. And I get to go where? To the Hamptons to babysit for the summer.
Yeah.
And my mother was like, absolutely not. She's like, you're not going to become a nanny. You're not going to be a housekeeper. She gave me all these lists of things that I wasn't going to do. And she gave me one ultimatum, Roman. She says, look, I'll babysit Danielle, my daughter at the time, if you go to school. And so for me, going to school was like freedom. I get to be away from a little 4-year-old for what? For half a day or whatever. And so she made it very clear that she wanted me to continue with my education. So I started right away. I was paying like foreign tuition that first year because I had just gotten my green card. So I started immediately.
And where did you went in the city?
I went to Bronx Community College first.
Yeah.
And then I went to John Jay College of Criminal Justice.
Nice. Awesome. I love that it was right in the city, you know, and to think about
in the heart of it.
Yeah, John Jay, and because John Jay is right downtown.
59th Street in Columbus.
Oh, it's in 59th Street, right. Oh, BMCC is downtown.
Yeah, BMCC is more almost to Brooklyn Bridge.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, I didn't realize it was on 59th. Yeah, that's wonderful. So you graduate, and of course, criminal justice. You know, John Jay really creates a lot of attorneys. A lot of people who come out of there go to law school, and probably in New York City end up becoming some sort of a public defender, or otherwise they're really kind of in the court system. It's less, you know, I don't know. Maybe I guess people go to corporate law as well, but I feel like a lot of people I've met from John Jay really are passionate about criminal justice specifically. Did you kind of know at that point that you maybe wanted to be a lawyer when you were going to John Jay, or, you know, and maybe this is where you can talk about how you met your mom's attorney and sort of that whole experience.
So I always wanted to become a lawyer. I just didn't know what that was or what it felt like. Because growing up in Jamaica, they had this thing. They said you can either be a lawyer, a doctor, or an Indian chief. All right, so we know Indian chief is off the table. So I think our families were leaving us with these hefty dreams of becoming either a lawyer or a doctor, even though, for one, we don't know how we're going to accomplish that. There's no track teaching you how to become a lawyer. But so I always knew I wanted to do law. I just never knew what it looked like. So my mother took me to the family, and the family had introduced my mother. When my mother was petitioning for us, this family had brought my mom to a lawyer, Mr. Mark Fish, in Manhattan, in one of those tall high-rise buildings. And so when I came, Mr. Fish told my mom to bring Dion over to see me. And I walked into his building. He's in a glass building. And first of all, the thing, and I always talk about how comfortable my mom was walking into this building to go see Mark. She calls him Mark Fish. We're going to go see Mr. Fish. So Mr. Fish was very welcoming. He's a little Jewish guy. I don't know if he's 5 feet tall, but he was just had an amazing relationship with my mother, and the comfort level with which my mom just walked into his office and say, I brought my daughter, and he knew everything about my case. He knew everything about my case because he had done the paperwork. So he said, oh, Daniel's here. And he says, oh, we're going to try to get your brother and sister. They should be here shortly. And, you know, and he's explaining all this to me as if I'm on his level. I was like, wow. So I was truly impressed when I met Mr. Fish. That and the fact that he was in this really nice building, glass, you know, floor to ceiling glass. And it just looked like he made a lot of money. And I'm like, I want to do that too. Right. And so he kind of talked me into what that would look like, and the time period and the commitment. So that was my first real introduction to this could be possible type of thing.
Did your mom ever say to you, you know, you should do what he's doing, or was that purely just you saw it and you saw yourself doing that in the future?
I saw what he was doing, and I saw how he had connected me to my mother. And so that for me was a big piece of, gosh, I would love to be able to do that. So for me, I didn't know that he was doing immigration law. Right. I just thought he was helping people to come to America. Yeah. Right. And I knew I wanted to kind of do that based on on how he presented himself.
That's a really nice story, because I think a lot of times lawyers have a bad rap, you know, for somebody who doesn't have any lawyers in their family or in their circle. Right. You see stuff on TV or you hear all the jokes. So the fact that your introduction to a lawyer was actually someone who was, welcoming and warm and knew a lot and made you feel comfortable is pretty awesome.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We take a quick pause here. So Yasmin, all the way from Algeria, unbelievable. Hi, Yasmin. Thank you so much for watching. Gabby saying, exciting to hear the conversations. Dionnie's clubhouse rooms are not to miss. Hello from Milwaukee,
Gabby.
Wisconsin. Thank you, Gabby. And hi. And Syed Ali says, hello, everyone. So hi, Syed.
Hi, Syed.
Again, leave us a comment. Let us know where you are. I always love these conversations. And of course, knowing where people are from, which is so cool. I mean, knowing that just the thought of someone hanging out and sitting in Algeria or somewhere else in the country or the world is unbelievable to me. God bless the internet.
Yes.
So, so you had this realization, and you obviously were sort of taken aback in a positive way by this interaction with the attorney. So talk about, because you live in New York, you went to school in Michigan, right? Talk about that a little bit, because I know there were some long drives involved. And it wasn't, this wasn't like an easy cake walk in a park. So
it wasn't. So I took the stupid LSAT, Roman, and I just took it once. I didn't do an LSAT prep course because all my life with academics, I just jumped, like, I'll do this and I'll do it. So I took the LSAT, and I remember getting my score, and it was a 141. And I didn't know what that meant, but I knew it meant I was getting a lot of no's. Like, I was not getting into any law school. And for me, I'm like, I don't want to take this LSAT again. I really just don't want to take it again. So I started applying for schools. Of course, CUNY, I wanted to go to CUNY. I applied, and I was applying to like Harvard. And I think they were like, who is this girl? Like, when I look back, I'm like, they're probably thinking, why? Remember, they used to send you the books? Back then, it wasn't electronic. And I would have a stack of those books from like all, St. John's, Quinnipiac, like just a whole stack of books. And I'm like, just going to keep applying. And I'm sending them my $50. I'm sending them my $35, whatever. I just keep sending them the application fee. And so I finally got accepted to a school in Michigan, Lansing, Michigan. It was Thomas M. Cooley Law School. And that's when I started to learn about tiers. So there's tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4. I'm like, it can't be that bad. I'm in tier 4. It's not like I'm in tier 10. I didn't realize that 4, like it's 1, 2, 3, 4. So I went, and I mean, for me, it was just, here's this opportunity. I get to go year round, and I could be out in 2 years, right? And I literally just jumped at it. I packed up my kids. At the time, I had 2 children. My son Dionnie had come along by then, and I just said, you know what? I'm moving to Michigan, and I literally moved in my 1998 Nissan Altima. I moved from New York to Michigan, and I moved in a car. So I drove one trip by myself with everything loaded, came back, got the kids, and then went off to Michigan for law school.
So you drove, I'm just trying to imagine, you drove there with your stuff, you drove back to New York, got the kids, and then drove again to Michigan. Wow.
All right. Do you know this group called Matchbox 20?
Yeah, of course.
All right. So I had a Matchbox 20 CD in my disc player. The car was so packed that all my CDs were packed away. So I know all the Matchbox 20 songs by heart because I listened to them for 10 hours. So much so that I went to their concert because I knew all their songs from that Mad Season DVD.
Yeah.
Yes. I know all the songs from Mad Season.
That is hilarious. I feel like that's a story that they should know this story.
Because everything was packed away, and the car was packed. The only seat that was empty was for me to drive. Everything was packed, the trunk, the seats, the passenger side. I wish there was Facebook back then, or, where I could have taken a picture, or probably I would have been too ashamed to take the picture.
Yeah, right. It's so different now looking back on it, but at the time it was something that you just had to do. And
yeah,
I'm curious, when you hear any song from that album, does it just immediately
I start busting out?
Yeah, that's so funny. Wow. So you moved, and how old were your kids at the time?
So by that time, Daniel was 11 and Dionnie was 7.
Okay, so they were in school. So you had to
move. No,
Dionnie
was 4, Daniel was 11.
Wow. So it was another time that they basically had to move, or at least your daughter, your oldest, had to move.
Right. Again.
So you had to enroll 2 years. I'm assuming that you moved in somewhere in Lansing or near Lansing, sent your kids to school there. And were you was this a full-time
Full-time.
And were you working too, or was it like
what I did, so I was I was a 911 operator with the city of New York. So I pulled out all my pension. Back then it was a little bit over $13,000, which was a load of money, like a boatload of money. So I pulled my pension out and I had that with me. And then, so for my first year of law school, I did not work. I just lived off family and friends, and everybody felt sorry for me. My mother felt sorry for me. So the first year I didn't work. And then by the second year, I started like substitute teaching, started doing some odd jobs to kind of supplement my income.
Yeah, that's crazy. And also to think about, generally speaking, people say like, no, don't touch your pension, don't do any of that stuff.
Yeah.
But like, you have no choice, right?
I pulled it like, and I didn't even regret it. I just thought, I had city bonds. I don't know if they're still doing those. I had bought a ton of bonds from New York City. Remember, they used to sell bonds? I don't know if they still do. I had so many. Sold them all.
Oh, wow.
The bank lady was like, no, you shouldn't. I'm like, I am broke. I need milk.
Yeah.
Here you go. Yeah.
And I think the really kind of inspiring thing about that is, I mean, yes, someone like the bank person would say, oh, not a good idea, but it's like, yes, you're buying milk, but you're also investing in your future. You're going to law school. You're getting higher education. I mean, look, the return on interest of those bonds might be higher than your savings account, but it's not going to be ever higher than elevating yourself from a career perspective.
Absolutely.
So, and obviously, and once we'll get to everything you're doing now, I'm sure those city bonds were well worth it. Well worth it. So, wow, that's crazy. So you went to school 2 years, which is great, right? Because at least you're not making money for less time. Typically, law school, even full-time, is 3 years. So you graduate law school. Did you know throughout this whole time that you wanted to be an immigration attorney, or were you still like, whatever comes, I'll do? And sort of, what did you do when you graduated?
I was definitely pursuing immigration law. Like, I would call up immigration attorneys. I did internships, hung close to the immigration clinics at my law school. I definitely stayed very close to the profession. I did do a little bit of criminal work. I did a little bit of time with the federal public defender, but I never enjoyed it. I knew I wanted to pursue immigration law. It was just a matter of how do I get in and what will that look like? But I definitely knew that's what I wanted to pursue.
And so were you able to get maybe an internship or anything like that, either during school or sort of, what did you do afterwards when you graduated?
So when I graduated, so back up a little bit. So all this time I'm, like hustling, filling out forms. Remember, we used to go to Federal Plaza, we get the forms and I would fill them out for people, pay me $80, pay me $50, which I learned later from the ethics professor at my law school that it's unauthorized practice of law. Sorry, Dean Timmer. I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm just helping somebody telling them what form they need for this or what form they need for that. So I learned about that. And I had some interns with like the State Bar of Michigan. I worked there. I had internship with like solo practitioners that did immigration law. So I really got to see how they ran their business. And then I worked on the policy side of things, where I worked with the State Bar of Michigan, where we were doing flyers on like collateral consequences of criminal convictions for immigrants. And it was more of the education piece, building programs for immigrants. And I truly, truly enjoyed that side of things. I definitely did.
And so when you graduated, what did you do?
So I went first to the State Bar of Michigan, and now I have Wynter Law Practice. So I started Wynter Law Practice right away, even though I hadn't passed the bar. I took the New York bar a couple times, didn't pass it, and then I took Michigan. I'm licensed now, but I did struggle with the bar a little bit. And I like to talk about some of my failures, Roman, because I think so much time has passed between my failures and my success that sometimes young attorneys don't realize that there's going to be a little bit of bumpy road ahead. Because if all I'm saying is, look, I'm in a hotel in Turks and Caicos meeting with a client, it doesn't show that, I went through some bumps along the road, and I'm still going through bumps, but you go through some bumps along the road in order to get here. So I started Wynter Law Practice, started doing like basic immigration, like just form. I wasn't going to do waivers, and I'm not going to go to court. I'm just going to do little forms. Like, you want to file for your wife? I can do that, the basic stuff. And then I started, once I went to the state bar and I started to see how the policy side of things, I started sinking my teeth into like VAWA. I started sinking my teeth into some asylum work. I started sinking my teeth into some of those humanitarian stuff. From there. And then we rolled around to about 2008, 2009, and I don't remember if you remember, the economy tanked.
Yes, I do.
So it was very rough. And so I took a job with my former law school. And as part of that, I said, I want to keep my practice and, work in some administrative position. It wasn't anything to scream home about, but at least it kept the lights on. So I did that while, and it's funny because that's how my practice was always built, with the fact that it's portable. I can travel with it or I can work with it. So I've always built like a portable practice. And I always tell people it wasn't by design. It's not like I sat down and said, this is a practice I'm going to build. Absolutely not. It was just how my life was going and how things were going. So it was not by, it was not like I'm a genius. I think it was more out of luck than me saying, this is what I want my practice to look like.
When you, and just to clarify, when you graduated law school in Michigan, did you move back to New York right away? Because you stayed there working?
I stayed. So I semi-moved back, meaning my mom was still living in the Bronx. And I'm like, okay, let me take the bar exam. And if I pass the bar exam, I'll come home. So I studied for the bar exam while I was still living in Michigan, and I failed the bar exam. So I said, I'm not coming home. It's going to be too expensive. So I stayed in Michigan. So I never made it back to New York because I never passed the bar exam.
Right.
I passed New Jersey.
There you go. and of course,
I did pass New Jersey.
And Michigan. That was your first one.
Yeah, Michigan and New Jersey, yes.
And so when you were working, I was just trying to understand, when you were working for the law school, when you went back, you were living there. So I
was living in Michigan,
okay.
Yes.
Got it, of course. So when, so 2008 economy tanked. I remember that I was in college, and we had, actually, funny enough, I was studying finance or financial economics, and I had an internship lined up at Bear Stearns, if you remember that investment bank.
The big
bank, yeah. I worked there for the 2 prior summers as like like an intern pushing papers or whatever. But it was I was able to be in this cool, same thing as, you're like, oh, wow, I'm in this office. It's so fancy. And then, the market crashed and Bear Stearns was acquired because and I was like, oh my God, I have what am I going to do? So I do remember that very much. I ended up being okay and got another internship, but it was, and it's funny because now that COVID this is a little bit of an aside, but now that COVID, really, I don't know if we can say tanked our economy, but really impacted it heavily. And now, of course, I'm no longer in school. I run my own business. It's really interesting to see. I mean, I'm very grateful to have my health and, to have been able to survive this whole thing. And of course, economic downturns are challenging for a lot of different people, but it's been interesting to watch it happen from a business owner's perspective.
Right.
In school, you hear oh no, the economy's tanking. This is awful. There are people who win in these kind of situations, right? Yes. There are businesses that do well. There are businesses that are born out of economic downturns. So I'm curious, when it ended, in 2000, I guess we could say 2009, the kind of economy started to creep back up. At some point, obviously, you felt comfortable enough to leave the work you were doing at the school and to go back into practice. How did you do that? And sort of, can you talk a little bit about where this idea of, you're based in Florida now, right?
Yes.
In the U.S. So how did this happen where you moved to Florida and started really growing your virtual practice? There were no tools. There were very few tools back then. How did you do it?
So a part of it came from me living in Michigan. And I remember going back home sometimes to New York, and we'd be going to the laundromat and my mom would be, oh, so-and-so from church got a letter from immigration. And sometimes a lot of these people had lawyers. They had lawyers, but my mom would say, oh, Dion does this, or Dion can help. She would call me Dion. And so a part of it was, wait a minute, they're waiting for me to come to look at this paper. I'm driving, and I didn't say to them, fax it to me or email it to me or scan it to me. I said, just hold on to that paper, and when I come back to New York, I'll look at it for you. So that's kind of how things started growing. And then when it came time and I'm leaving Michigan to go to Florida, I'm like, I'm not going to leave all my clients behind. You know what it's like, Roman, to build up a decent amount of practice, right? I'm like, I'm not going to leave them. So I started to think of ways in which I can still keep these people in my universe. And I felt at the time I felt like I spoke New York. So I was getting a lot of clients out of New York because, once you start saying, oh, I'm from the Bronx, they're like, we're from Queens. So I wasn't going to close that door either. So for me, I was holding events in the Bronx. Like I would go up once every 3 months, go to a restaurant in the Bronx. I'm buying appetizers, come on out, come meet with me and chat about your immigration case, right? So it became clear to me that I cannot compete at the time. I could not compete with the brick and mortar stores. It's just not going to happen. So I had to find a way, one, to get a client. And I knew I had to sometimes meet the client where they are. So I can't say to them, fly to Florida to come and meet with me or fly to Michigan to meet with me. It became, hey, and Zoom and everything we're doing now was not popular. In fact, there were times very earlier on, and I talk about this, I didn't want people to know I didn't have a brick and mortar. Because it's almost like, wait a minute, are you really a lawyer then? If you don't have this big building with your name on top of it. Now it's cool. So for me, it was easy to see, wait a minute, I just got 3 clients in somebody's backyard, which is what I tell people in the academy, like, why am I coming into your backyard getting quality clients, right? So, and even now I'm in Turks, like I'm here for a client. So I'm in somebody's backyard getting a client. So for me, it was easy and it became very clear. And I love to travel. And I love my freedom. So quality of life was very important to me. So I wanted to be able to at least balance the two.
So what did you do in the beginning? I mean, to your point, there was no Zoom, there was no Google Docs, email maybe was obviously around, but not everyone had it on their phones at their fingertips. I'm curious, how did you, right? Because you're also like, let me back up for a moment. It sounds like your firm was growing. I mean, the idea that you were able to go from, you went from part-time job at the school just to keep the lights on to going to a restaurant and paying for everyone's appetizers just to get them in. I mean, that's a marketing spend, right? That's a sunk cost in the appetizers just to get people in. That's, those are 2 different levels. So was it just sort of an organic growth? Did anything happen where you hit your stride and the practice started to grow?
I think I hit my stride one. I started to get good help, and I started to understand the power of social media. I really started to see how and two, I also started to hone in on my market share. So I wasn't going after every client. I started going into like, okay, this is a good area. I found my ideal client over here. I'm going to market as much over there as possible. I might say to my friend who works at the hospital, hey, put my cards in the lobby of the hospital or in the lunchroom. So I started to do very targeted approach. Even working with the military clients that I have, I make sure it's very, very targeted. And I started to up level my services, meaning I'm sending fruit baskets. I'm sending flowers. Like every client that gets a green card or every client that goes to an interview through my firm and their success, they're getting a basket of something from us. So I started to really personalize my service, and I realized I could separate myself from what a lot of the other firms were offering. And I think you said it best, Roman. I hit my stride. I came out from, I don't have to hide the fact that I'm a virtual attorney. I really don't have to hide that fact anymore. So I was just shouting about it everywhere. Like, this is what I do. I'm virtual. And people kind of gravitated towards that.
And this was in the early 2010s?
No, we're talking now, we're in 2014, okay. 2015. I think 2010, I'm still in laundromats, I joked with a young woman the other day. 2010, I think I was still meeting people in Applebee's. Maybe I used to go to remember Applebee's was a thing. Yeah. I'm meeting Applebee's was a thing. Now nobody goes to Applebee's, but for me, hey, I'll meet you at Applebee's and, you buy a salad or something and you spend $20 and the client is literally sitting there for me filling out paperwork. Mm-hmm. We're filling out this at Applebee's. So now we're in about 14, 15 when I'm really like, wow, this this could potentially work.
Wow, that's crazy. One thing I'm curious that I think would be maybe really helpful for people who are watching or listening, how did you decide, sort of which clients to hone in on? Was it, and I want to preface this by saying that one of the first times that you and I had spoken, if you remember, I'm sure you do because I bring this up all the time, I loved how you were doing a webinar, and I remember that you were marketing it in Jamaican time zone, right? Versus
I think it was Nigerian.
Oh, was it nice? Sorry, you're right. Sorry, exactly.
It's Nigerian.
Exactly. And I thought that was so brilliant because it was such a like the content was the same, but that sort of strategy was a signal to that demographic and that that, what am I trying to say?
That audience.
Part of the world. Yeah, that
Right.
audience.
Yes.
That you're talking to them and you want to help them. But that was obviously a conscious decision. So when in the beginning, sort of how did you decide, okay, I'm going to hone in on, like you mentioned, you were working with military folks, you had cards in the hospital. Were there certain visa types that you were going after? Was it a certain demographic of people you were going after? Were they based in a certain part of the country? How did you start thinking through that?
I think I realized very early on, for one, I traveled the world. So I realized very early on that I wanted clients, I want my clients to not all be physically within the United States. That's for one, because I find that they can appreciate different things about me. And I also realized too that I do have some strengths. The fact that I travel the world. So if I'm talking to you and you're talking about, I don't know, Cancun, or you're talking about Portugal or something, I can have that conversation. And so I knew I wanted certain kinds of clients with certain global mindsets. That was important for me. And I wanted clients who wanted to work with me. Because I think when we start out as attorneys, we just want all the clients, and we get heartbroken when this client doesn't choose us. So very early on, I said I want clients who will accept Dionnie for Dionnie, and clients who really, really, which was scary. It was scary because remember, you want to say you have this book of business, you want to say you're growing, and so it was very scary for me. But once I kind of figured out who I was and what I have to offer, that became like my sweet spot. Like, that's who I want to work with. Especially like women that are overseas and I loved marriage-based green card because it's romantic. My husband and I went through the whole process. So I think for me, I really, really loved, and of course I've expanded, but that's one of the things that I absolutely, absolutely love to do are the marriage-based green cards.
And I like the idea of having people want to work with you. And this is where I guess you said you started advertising that you're a virtual attorney. Because I assume that if people don't like that, they'll be harder to get their documentation to you, or they'll be annoyed when you're on the phone with them in a car. Even if they can hear you perfectly, but knowing that you're in a car, they might be like, what is this? It's unprofessional. Whereas, to your point, if you advertise that, then they're going to be like, oh, cool, you're on your way to XYZ. Okay, great. Let's have this 30-minute conversation. It won't actually bother them. If anything, they'll appreciate that about you.
And some of them love it. And, I worked with a branding coach in about 2017, and she was the one that got me in my car singing that It's Friday. She's like, just come out, let people know what you do. And it's amazing how many people gravitate towards that once you come out as your true self. Like, this is it.
I love that. There's so many ways that so many questions that I want to ask you. The first thing because I want to get to the immigration law, the Wynter Immigration Law Academy. I do want to ask you, because that is the most recent endeavor that you've really started. I do want to ask you, you said you had a branding coach in 2017. I love your videos, and I've even, I've sang the song myself this Friday. I'm curious, you when Clubhouse launched, you became massive. You just went right in and you built up the Immigration Law Academy there, which I think was first, right? Is that where it started, on Clubhouse?
No, I had the Immigration Law Academy before Clubhouse.
Okay.
So the Immigration Law Academy started with me. I was going to do courses Like, so for example, if you're going through naturalization, I built out the course. It's on Thinkific. You could just buy the course through the academy. What I had for lawyers before the academy was pick my brain. Because, you know, lawyers would call you to ask you questions. And I always say, you can pick my brain, but you can't pick my brain for free. Mm-hmm. And so it was me working with my coaches, because I use business coaches. I've taken your course because I want to grow. And so that came out. And then when Clubhouse came, it just took off. It was like perfect timing when Clubhouse came about.
So can you talk a little bit about that? You know, for anybody who's watching or listening, of course, Clubhouse was an audio only social media app that completely blew up during COVID, and now is of course still around. There's competitors now that have come in, but it's a really wonderful medium and a really great platform. You created the Immigration Law Academy in Clubhouse. I think you had live discussions Monday, Wednesday, Friday, right?
Mm-hmm. Monday, Wednesday, Friday,
all about different topics. Share your immigration story, or you had guests on with tips. That was effectively like its own company. I mean, you had people who were helping. Can you talk a little bit about how that?
So we still do. So through the academy, attorneys can work with me to kind of. I tell them, you're not becoming Dionnie, but I'm going to take everything that I've learned over the years, and I'm going to show you how you can, one, streamline your firm, build a practice of your dreams. And it doesn't have to be the practice that you think that everybody has. It can be the kind of practice that you like. And it's a beautiful thing. And we have people that work in the academy on Clubhouse. In fact, we're going to be and we do retreats. So we did our Orlando retreat in May, and then we're doing San Diego in September. So we do retreats with the attorneys, which is just fabulous, where we get to meet each other face to face, because a lot of times we're just seeing each other, you know, virtually. So we get to meet face to face at the retreat. But the academy has been growing. It's amazing. I think Clubhouse just took it to a whole other level, much faster than I could ever have imagined. So I think I should thank Clubhouse for helping the academy grow much faster than I thought it even would have.
And so I want to kind of think about what people can take away from this, right? It's not necessarily to say, hey, everyone should go create their own club on Clubhouse or become an influencer on Clubhouse. But I want to try to distill something from it, because from the way I see it, you already had this, you were building a community. So to me, there's the foundation of, you had a community that you were building. You had something you wanted to offer to your peers or to your prospective clients. And then you saw this platform that I guess worked for you. It was audio. It was, you can do it from wherever. You know, if I'm a younger or starting out attorney, or perhaps an immigration tech startup founder, and I'm building up a business, you know, I don't know, what lesson can you maybe share from your Clubhouse experience? Because again, you jumped on there and it just blew up and became its own thing.
I think if I were to distill something to younger attorneys, I would say to do it scared. I always tell people, like, the first time I did my Clubhouse room, nobody was in there. Like, I opened the room, it's like throwing a party. You bought the champagne, you have the cakes, and nobody shows up. So it wasn't like I turned on the switch and people showed up. No, when I say nobody, Roman, I mean, it was like crickets. And then when I did the second room, I asked all my friends to come. Like, I told, like, can you please join me on Clubhouse? So I was preaching to the choir, because they didn't really need an immigration lawyer. They didn't need anything, but they were there. So it kind of felt good. And we talked about nothing. And so I made this commitment to myself. You know what? I'm just going to keep going in the app. I'm going to turn it on, and I'm going to talk. I'm going to do it. And before you know it, it took on a life of its own. And I think it was through consistency, to the point where I was losing my voice. Because if I went on a Monday and there were 5 people in the room, Roman, I'm going to be in there talking to 5 people. If I got on there on a Monday and there was 100 people in the room, I'm going to be talking to 100 people. And then make those connections off the app. So you got to reach out to people and say, hey, I saw you and thank you for joining. I see you. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. Reaching out to people and thanking them for supporting you, because of course you're not paying them to be there. So I think that really helps. So if I were to say anything, I would say do it scared, and don't be afraid to put yourself out there.
I love that.
Don't be afraid to just turn on that phone or pick up that phone, answer the phone or call somebody up. Do not be afraid to put yourself out there. And it doesn't mean you're going to make money. You're not going to make money from it, but it builds up your confidence as a practitioner. And, somebody will call you and ask you a question about what you do.
And I think even if you work for a company or it'll help you build your network. It'll introduce you to people who maybe your future colleague or your future boss or your future co-founder.
Absolutely.
Or what have you.
Absolutely. And I think and then I'll add this real quick too. I think a lot of young attorneys think because they're at a firm, they should not be bringing in business, or they're insulated. I don't need to build my brand on LinkedIn, or I don't need to do anything because I'm at a firm. I think that's a huge misconception. That you don't need to, that you do need to identify yourself. You do need to build your brand, and you do need to be involved and bring business through that door.
And why do you think that? I'm just curious to go through that a little bit.
I think just in talking to some people, I'll reach out to them and I say, oh, this is what I'm doing. And they'll say, oh, I don't want your services, or I'm okay. I'm with such and such law firm. And I've had the turnaround where a month or two later, they're calling me up because the firm either laid them off, or some things are changing, or things are not going as planned for them. So I think it's important that you do build your brand, even if you're with a firm or small, large firm, it doesn't matter. Build your brand anyway.
I want to just give a quick shout out. Heather saying, listening to this en route to Virginia from New Jersey. So thank you.
Drive carefully, Heather.
Drive carefully. I hope you're riding, Heather, and not driving, but if you are driving, definitely drive carefully, please. And the H1B guy from YouTube says, hey, Roman, Dionnie, so critical to find your niche while remaining true to yourself.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
that keeps you happy. I mean, if you remain true to yourself, and if you find a niche that you're genuinely passionate about and know about, it makes work so much easier. You get to talk about the things you love, and I want to ask a question here, because I do love to, of course, talk about the technology. You're in Turks and Caicos right now. You kind of mentioned it earlier in passing, but you are in Turks and Caicos, a beautiful island in the Caribbean. You're going basically on a client visit. Question: are you able to relax a little bit while you're there, or are you in and out?
Of course, I'm relaxing. Oh, definitely. I'll be here until Monday, so yes, I'll be relaxing.
Good. That's amazing.
Definitely relax.
And so, as far as I know, that's one of the things that you effectively, not that you teach people in the Immigration Law Academy, but you're basically saying, like, look, this is my firm. I have a thriving practice, and I get to do it while either I'm at home, which I'm on my own time, I'm in Jamaica with my family on my own time, I'm in a hotel here, I'm at the beach there, whatever. You're still working.
Absolutely. And it's a mindset shift, Roman.
Meaning, what do you mean by that?
I think a lot of people, when they think of the practice of law, they think they have to put on the gray suit, go to the building, open the door, go sit at a desk, and that's how you practice law.
But
it doesn't have to be that. It doesn't. And clients know, and clients appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And by the way, if you're happier doing it that way, you will be a better service provider too. You won't be as stressed. You'll be more, maybe be more rested. Imagine that.
Yes.
So again, I know you sort of go through this with the folks in the academy, but how can, I guess, attorneys, and I think from other service providers, maybe if you're not an immigration lawyer, but you are, in the global mobility industry, there are a lot of solo or small founders that run their own practice. How do you start building this kind of practice? Maybe from the technological side, or maybe from the sort of, branding side. Like, what are some of the things that you share with folks that maybe they can take away from here?
So I think you have to realize you cannot do everything. So if you're going to do a niche practice like mine, you have to realize, look, like, I know with what I do, I can't do personal injury, criminal defense, and immigration law from Turks and Caicos out of my bag. Like, it doesn't work like that. So you have to find a niche, and you have to be super honest with your clients. You have to also invest in great technology. Like, I cannot say to my client, you know what, the Wi-Fi is bad. No, like, your client should be able to reach you. I can't say to my client, if I'm having a conversation, you know what, I got to go, it's an international call. So you have to make sure you remove all the barriers that would make a client say, you know what, that's exactly why I didn't want to work with you. You have to make sure you remove those barriers. You have to put the correct infrastructure in place. You have to make things very simple for your client, whether it's WhatsApp. Like some attorneys will say, oh, I'm not going to answer my phone. I will answer my phone anytime I want because I manage my time. So if a client is calling me and they want to talk to me on a Saturday afternoon, like for some attorneys at Friday at 5, they're turning off the lights. For me, Friday at 5, maybe at 6, I'm going to go have dinner with my client. And it's Friday evening. So you have to take some of those, what we were taught in law school about what lawyers did, what they look like. You have to take some of that out of it because remember, you're competing with individuals and their traditional mindset of the law. Mm-hmm. You're competing with that. You got to have great technology. Like you have to have really, really good technology. You have to have good technology. I can't even stress that enough.
So what are some of the, is it like, so for example, for me, for my business, I'm also fully virtual. I love Monday.com. It's amazing for task management. I obviously can't live without Google for business because, Google Docs and Sheets and obviously Gmail, those are great. And Slack is an amazing communication tool. You can search through your chats. I don't know. What are some of the tools? Maybe?
WhatsApp. I love WhatsApp. Like every person on the planet understands WhatsApp. So I love WhatsApp. Trello. I love Trello. I use that with my assistants because, even though you have clients and then you have staff. And, I always say, and this is I know we're talking, but I have a legal assistant who will physically go to my home to check my mailbox because remember, USCIS doesn't care that I'm virtual. So I do have a legal assistant that will go to my home if I'm on the road 3 days a week, check the mailbox. So some of that still isn't virtual. So you have to have having the ability for clients to sign those legal services contract. You have to have that in place. So you have Sign Easy. So you have to have all these things built in that helps the practice run.
Yeah, I love that.
And you have to be able to send out an invoice. Like you have to be able to get, here's a contract. You can't say to the client, well, I'm in Turks and Caicos, man. When I get back to the office on Monday, you have to be, it has to be seamless. Otherwise clients they won't want to work with you.
Mm-hmm. One of the positives, I think that, this entire COVID situation has shown us is that more people are becoming okay with working virtually. I mean, if you're working for a company, we all hear about the work from home sort of movement, at least partially, but that I think it's the same for service providers, right? Your telemedicine has increased dramatically and it's definitely here to stay. And so, I think it's the same thing for telelegal, I suppose.
Telelegal. I love that.
That's amazing. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And, it also is a good reminder that you still need, you need help. And then B, you may need help that's on the ground. So having somebody come and check your mailbox, that's not a sexy task, but if you're the boss and you're in Turks and Caicos and you want to make sure that you didn't get,
I didn't miss anything.
Right.
Right.
You're going to have to hire someone to drive to your house, check your mailbox and maybe take a picture or let you know, and then you can make a decision accordingly.
And let me add this one last thing with the academy that I didn't foresee happening. It's almost like the academy is this huge immigration law firm because I don't handle every kind of immigration case. So there are times when I have to call somebody up and say, hey, I have this case. Do you mind handling that? Because I have this caller or I have this person. Can you handle that? Because I don't do it. Or I might have a case with something really technical. I'm like, hey, tell me about this or vice versa. So that's one of the beautiful thing about the academy. Or I can say, look, you're in Texas. Can you cover this for me? Because it's somebody that I've gotten to know over the last year. So it really works. So you got to have some help, right? Because you can't sometimes I have a hearing in Fort Lauderdale and New York. I can't be in both places at once. It's good to have somebody to be able to cover some of those for you.
That really leads me to a question about what's the future for you? What's the future for the Wynter Immigration Law Academy? Are you building things? Are you thinking of things? I'm curious, where do you see it going in the next, let's say few years?
Oh my gosh. So I want to quit the practice of law. I want to be you. I was listening to you earlier when you were introducing yourself. I think I've done my bit with the practice of law, and I am building the infrastructure for the academy to be the big replacement for the practice. I see probably month long courses with attorneys, working with some paralegals. I know California is moving into the direction of allowing non-lawyers to represent immigrants, so I want to do that's one of the reasons why I want to go west in September to see how that is going. But I see the Immigration Law Academy becoming like a proper university where I'm the dean and director or something of that sort, educating people, getting them ready to go work in immigration law firms, where they've been certified by us. But we do have a lot of infrastructure that we're building out to accommodate this.
That's amazing. Do you think you'd miss the practice of law if you do that?
I'll still dabble. Do you miss it?
Sometimes. I do sometimes. But I realized for me, what I missed was solving a problem with a client. I love listening. I would spend way too much time on the phone with clients. And actually, because I did, H-1B and sort of business immigration, my client was actually the company. So I would be spending time with the candidate, right? Or the beneficiary, way too much time listening to what's their life story? Like, I was probably doing this. I should have had a podcast since then. And because I wanted to understand what they wanted, right? Because, then it's like, all right, well, then maybe you can consider, if your H-1B is not going to go through, maybe you can consider going back to school, because I know that you have the financial resources,
right?
And you love education anyway. For someone else, that would never fly. They have a spouse and they need, and it's like, okay, well, then let's see, maybe an O1 could be a really good option. You've done this job for now 5 years. You've actually done this award, like whatever it might be. And I really wanted to do that. And I think a lot of times, in addition to that, I wouldn't have an answer. It was just listening to them and talking to them, making them feel good. And at the end of the call, they call me frantic, and then we end the call and they're calm. And that felt sometimes even better to me than working on the case itself, right? Like making the person feel cared for and whatnot. I do miss that. Do I miss filling out I-129s? No, of course not. Who enjoys that?
Nobody.
Do I miss, I forgot to staple the G28? No, I don't. So I think I hear you. Like I know, and I think we can figure out a way, and you found this as well, to impact the industry that is so personal to you and that you know a lot about, but you can impact it in a way that isn't necessarily by doing legal work.
Right. Yeah, I think I'm ready to call that quits, but I will work. There's some clients, there are families that I've been working with for the last 10 years, the same family. You go to the baby shower, you go to the wedding. So of course I'm going to stick around for them, but eventually I think I want to get a cabin upstate and
I would peg you more as a beach house.
I definitely am. I'm a beach house kind of girl. Yeah. I am. When we finish, I'll show you my views. I'm literally like over the ocean. Like I'm a beach house. Yeah.
That's amazing. So I kind of love to end these conversations with maybe a question. Well, I want to ask you one specific question, but before I do that, I'm curious, you've worked all around the world. What's your most memorable sort of work travel situation? Maybe it's right now in Turks and Caicos. I don't know.
Gosh, most memorable. I would, funny enough, I would put it back to the Bronx, me buying appetizers for people, because that's when, so like now it's a little bit more luxurious, but back in those days it was, you're in some little hole in the wall Jamaican restaurant in the Bronx, and the appetizer is, maybe some fried chicken wings and celery sticks. And you're like, gosh, I just spent $250, and am I going to get a client, and is it going to be worth it? I think those for me were when, you're hauling business cards and you're putting them out on tables. I think I love those days. I think those are my memorable days when, it's me and my husband setting up, the business cards in the center of the table, and everybody that walks and you're trying to jump on them to say, hi, do you have an immigration matter? Or welcome, what's your name? How did you find out about? I kind of miss, I think those were my most memorable, because for me, it felt like the Bronx girl had come home, because I lived in the Bronx, and here she is, and she's a lawyer now, and she's, in a sense, I was giving back, even though I was doing it for business. I think those are my most memorable. Yeah.
I love that.
Can I shout out Steamhouse Restaurant in Yonkers, New York?
Oh, nice. I have to go check it out. I've never
Yes,
been there.
Steamhouse. Yeah, I've had an event there.
So I love that. That's such a great image. And, I've been thinking about that too. Just from my perspective, I think that, hopefully, and I wish you, of course, all the success going forward and growth. But there, even if you start a completely new venture, you want to start a restaurant, I feel like it'll never be the same as when you were completely back against the wall, just doing whatever you could to grow your first business, where you didn't have any sort of cushion, right?
Yes, because my husband and I would fly to New York. We're buying appetizers. We're hauling stuff with us, and then you're just sitting there, praying somebody walks in, and that they just didn't come for the appetizers. Because you're doing the math, and we're fortunate enough now where we can do a little bit more, but those days were different. I'm gonna say, but because I believed in a dream, I believed in what I was doing, and I was gonna not let up off the gas.
I love it. Well, Dionnie, thank you so much. That's so inspiring, and what a great story to sort of leave off on. I really appreciate your time and sharing your story. And I hope that people took a lot away from this in terms of both practical, what tools you can use, how you can think about your business, and also just inspirationally, like that we can do what we set our minds to without limitation. So thank you. This was wonderful. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Roman. Thank you so much. And, I want to personally thank you because you've really poured into me in the last year or so, just being kind. And you've given so many of us women that have not had a platform like this. You've given us a platform. And I don't know if you realize what you're doing, but it means a lot to me. It means a lot. I remember when I said, Roman, I want to do this. And before you know it, I was doing it because you made it happen. So I want to thank you personally for just giving us, elevating us. I appreciate it.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I don't know what to say after that, but thank you everybody so much for being here and for supporting the show. I hope you took a lot away. I definitely always, whenever I get to talk to Dionnie or listen, I'm always like inspired and energized. I feel like I left a little bit of work to do because I wanted this jolt of inspiration. So now I'm going to go back to work. Thank you everyone as always for watching and for listening. And I'll be taking if you're watching this live, I'm taking the next 2 weeks off because I am also going on, well, not also because Dionnie's at work, but I'm going on vacation. I'll be by a beach. No show for the next 2 weeks, just taking a little bit of time off, but we'll be back in September with some more guests and just amazing discussions. In the meantime, see you all on the internet, on LinkedIn. Thank you all so much again, as always, for supporting. Stay safe out there and peace out.